All right, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back to our second breakout session on emerging construction technologies and their legal issues. So today for this session, we have Chris Dutton and Dennis Franklin, who will be presenting on the information. So Chris Dutton is a senior associate in the Porter Wright's litigation department, focusing on construction and commercial business litigation. Chris has been involved in successful resolution of claims in state and federal court in both Ohio and Kentucky, as well as multiple private arbitrations and mediations. And Chris also has a pre-law background in the construction industry. And then Dennis Franklin is a business and finance attorney in Taft's Dayton office, where he focuses on corporate governance, privacy and data security, and data governance planning. He received his JD cum laude from the University of Dayton Law School, where he was a publications editor of the University of Dayton Law Review. And he also received his bachelor's degree in criminology and criminal justice studies with a minor in business from the Ohio State University. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dennis to kick off the session.
Thanks, Jen. Hey guys, good morning. As Jen said, my name is Dennis Franklin, and Chris and I are going to be talking about emerging construction technologies and their legal issues. And there's our picture, if you needed to see that. And then, all right, so introduction. A report by the McKinsey and Company group from a few years ago showed that the construction industry was the second least digitized sector in the world. This is just below or just above agriculture and hunting. And this is mostly just because it was slow to adopt new technologies, but this kind of makes sense because construction projects are very unique and difficult to digitize. With new technologies, however, this is becoming more of an option to digitize the construction industry. Such technologies include blockchain and smart contracts, Internet of Things, and building information modeling, machine learning, and then drones on the work site, which Chris will be talking about later in this presentation. Let's talk about blockchain first. This is probably going to be the most technical we're going to get today. Just to kind of understand how blockchain and smart contracts work, we have to get a little bit into the weeds. You might have heard of blockchain before, mostly in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin content.
They use our software and our training library and our microburst learning techniques. So we've had a lot of hands-on experience in helping people to modernize their training programs. Now, when we think about modernizing training programs, a lot of times we think about, oh, I need to go get technology. But there's a lot of things that you can do that don't involve getting technology to up your game and to really, change things up. And that's really what we're going to focus in on today. So
on the network in which every node will verify this block and then create a hash, basically saying that it's verified. And because of this, of how it works, it's very hard, it's immutable, it's very hard to change. If you change one block, it'll change all the other blocks, and it kind of creates an inconsistency. And that's why blockchain has become so popular, is it's very hard to change, and it's pretty much permanent and very secure. And included in blockchain is private and public blockchain. Public's the most common with Bitcoin right now, meaning that's the definition of blockchain. Basically, there is no central authority, and everyone can look into it and see what's going on in that public blockchain. However, in a private blockchain, which is probably what would be used in a construction industry context, you have to have somewhat of a central authority to send out authorizations and send out invitations to join this network. So you'll have a blockchain with a specific set of users that can do transactions in a construction project context. And then this is where smart contract comes in. A smart contract is a contract that's written entirely in code on the blockchain itself. When the conditions of the code are satisfied, the smart contract will automatically execute. So you'll code in certain, basically the provisions or parameters of the contract, and when it's met or entered into that block on the blockchain, it'll verify and then execute. This can be used to exchange money, property, shares, really a lot of things that you can think of. And this kind of allows parties that don't really know each other well to execute a transaction without a need of, let's say, a bank to do a letter of credit things like that. And kind of due to this lack of a central authority, the smart contract can reduce issues in communication and workflow. Instead of having this back and forth of the bank to do a letter of credit and waiting for other approvals from third parties, it can do that automatically within the blockchain. It saves time and a lot of money. And then real-world issues, or real-world uses, sorry, for blockchain and smart contracts. As I mentioned, letter of credit. Letter of credit is basically where you'll communicate with a bank, and the bank will facilitate payment once a transaction is complete. The smart contract kind of takes place of the bank in the situation where the bank makes sure the party has all the funding necessary, make sure the transaction was completed, and then sends out payment. Well, the blockchain and the smart contract takes place of that, and we'll make sure that the party facilitating payment has all the money in their account. We'll make sure that the transaction was completed and then automatically execute payment. And the way it kind of knows that the transaction was complete is that either you can use the Internet of Things devices on the work site that'll show, okay, it was delivered or the transaction was complete, and then it'll send it back to the blockchain and automatically execute the payment, or it can be done manually, entered into the node or the computer device. And then another one is bond and other payments. The simplest use of a smart contract is kind of in this context. Just think of project milestones on a construction site. Once that milestone is complete, a IoT device or manually entered into the blockchain, payment will automatically be sent. This is probably the most common way of doing it. A milestone is complete, payment done. That also obviously could cause issues later on, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but that's the most common. Another one is supply chain management. An IoT device on the work site could determine that the supplies are running low and then automatically order new payment if you have that set up in code. And then once the materials are delivered on the site, the IoT device could say, okay, the materials are delivered, automatically send payment. And then lastly, another one is subcontractor statement of works. This one's a little tricky. As I'll discuss here in a minute, smart contracts are difficult to do with things that are very unique or complex. And statement of works can be kind of unique and complex. And if they are, it's going to be difficult to code. But simple statement of works, they can be done in smart contracts. Legal issues. I want to be talking about a traditional contract a decent amount today, and that kind of means what you think it is. It's a normal written contract that's negotiated between the parties. This is, like I said before, this is used for things that cannot be written in code, things that are very, very unique or very difficult to write in code. That's where the traditional contract is going to come in. Enforceability. For a while, electronic signatures and smart contracts, things like these, were very difficult to determine if they're enforceable. But then a federal law called the E-Sign Act came about, where almost every state has a very similar law now. That basically says that an action may not be denied legal effect solely because it involves an electronic agent, so long as the action is basically attributable to a person. So as long as it's signed and it's attributable to a person, it's enforceable. While that's a federal law, states have enacted similar laws, but there are a few states that have gone beyond that and enacted laws specifically for smart contracts. States like Tennessee and Arizona and North Dakota, for example, have laws that basically say smart contracts may exist in commerce, and it may not be denied legal effect just because it has a smart contract term. And as time goes on, I see many more states doing this. Smart contracts and blockchain are becoming more mainstream and more popular. This will definitely become more popular in different states. Unilateral mistake is definitely an issue. A unilateral mistake usually occurs when one party enters into a contract and has a mistake of a term that basically affects their performance. Because of this, it's written in code by a third-party programmer. Not everyone can read code, so there's definitely a possibility of unilateral mistake. And a traditional contract can kind of help us out here, is that it clarifies what's under smart contract, what things that are obligated. A traditional contract can help in that sense, but unilateral mistake is definitely something to look out for. And then jurisdictional concerns, because blockchain is a network that can go across the world, jurisdictional concerns definitely come up. And while case law is very sparse right now on jurisdictional situations, there have been courts that have discussed blocks where the nodes or computers are located. So if computers are clustered in California, California might have jurisdiction, or if it's more clustered in a different country, the United States might not have jurisdiction. Another factor was the ledger, which is just the list of transactions. That's likely not a determinative factor, mainly because it's not a physical location, it's just a list of a transaction. Practical limitations. This is probably the biggest issue with smart contracts, is rescinding or modifying. As I mentioned before, they're immutable, and it's very difficult to go in and change a block, a single block, because every other block verifies the next one. So when you go in, you might be able to enter into the code ways to modify or rescind a smart contract, but this kind of defeats the purpose of a smart contract. A smart contract is supposed to be efficient, fast, without an intermediary. But if you enter in this back door to modify or rescind, you're kind of giving it a central authority to change things. So it defeats the purpose. But at the same time, there are multiple times when you might want to amend or modify. Say there's a change in law that makes a provision illegal, or there's a change in circumstances where the parties want to get rid of a few provisions. You might need to code certain situations in like that. Another issue is allocation of risks. Allocation of risk in this situation would be purely on the software side. Smart contracts can malfunction. It's still code. It could be improperly programmed by the programmer. There could be not enough money on the party side. So allocation of risks should be in your traditional contract, not the smart contract. And kind of on my next bullet point there on the slide, ambiguity is the main reason. When you go to do a code, it's on a smart contract, it goes off of an if-then statement. So if A occurs, then B will happen. B is the execution of the contract. And when you have ambiguity, it can't do that. It can't find A. So think of a force majeure clause, acts of God, or pandemics, basically will pause parties' obligations. And in this situation, you have a catch-all phrase at the end of that. The ambiguity cannot be coded in. So allocation of risks, force majeure clauses, things like that cannot be in the smart contract. That would have to be in a traditional contract. So while smart contracts can be useful, things like that cannot be done in smart contract as of now. All right, and then moving on to Internet of Things devices and BIMs, building information modeling. Internet of Things is a massive network of internet-connected consumer devices, and this can include industrial machines and devices on the work site. When you think of Internet of Things, you might think of TVs connected to your internet, Ring doorbells, Amazon Echoes, or smartwatches. The Internet of Things devices could also include, let's say, industrial machines on the work site, where if there's a malfunction, it'll notify whoever the authorized user is on that there's a malfunction and needs to be fixed. That's another Internet of Connected device. And real-world uses of these IoT devices, well, first could be drones, which Chris is going to talk about here soon. And they can be used to more effectively record daily expenses and resource efficiencies. They track supply levels on the work site, monitor work environment, and improve worker safety. And then when combined with building information modeling, which I'm going to talk about in a second, Internet of Things devices can create a live model of the construction site, which could have many uses. And kind of all of this collected together collects a vast amount of data, which can be used in the future. And in connection with machine learning, This could be used to find patterns on the work site to help make more efficient work sites, allocate company resources, and that data could be used for a lot. Building information modeling is already kind of being used by a lot of companies in construction, architecture, and engineering industries. However, a new generation of BIM technology coined by McKinsey and Company called Next Generation 5D BIM kind of takes it to the next level, where it incorporates project schedules, project costs, specifications, thermal and acoustic properties. This kind of it brings everything together, the IoT devices, everything that's on the work site. And this allows for the BIM, the model, to constantly update with real-time data. And basically, if it keeps adding real-time data, you can use this even after the project's over. And it updates with as the site's being improved and worked on. And this allows even more to find issues and errors on the work site. So if there's a inconsistency in structural dimensions or improperly installed pipes or wiring or other interferences on the work site, the IoT devices in the model could then flag that issue, send it to whoever the authorized user is, warn them of the error, and then also it could also change project schedules, project costs. It all does it itself based on the information it gathers from the work site. This approach basically it increases project efficiency by cutting the need of reviewing traditional models, hard copy or old BIM models. It finds errors much earlier, and this reduces an errors kind of piling up on each other. It saves time and a lot of money. IoT and BIM legal and practical issues. The Spearman Doctrine basically stands for a contractor who builds a project to the designer's specifications cannot be liable of a design defect. And this kind of just goes with you're in your role, you stick to your role, you can't be liable for another role's error. This emerged under the design bid build process. However, now that we have this BIM model that is so collaborative, where designers and contractors can work together in real time and send information in this model together, it kind of mixes their traditional roles of designer versus contractor. And the worry is that the courts see that as there's no separating designer and contractor, and could get rid of this doctrine, and liability could go to any party. While we haven't seen that yet in any court cases, the Supreme Court in Massachusetts did kind of get rid of that traditional design bid build application, and found that contractors or the doctrine applies to contractors when the contractor acts in good faith or reliance on the design and acted reasonably. The problem with that is it still uses the traditional roles of designer and contractor. And with this developing technology, the problem is of mixing those roles. And that's where the traditional contract will come in. The traditional contract can easily separate parties and say, you're a designer, you're a contractor, you do this, you do that. And that could help a court separate the roles and keep this doctrine intact. And again, mistaken risk, same as smart contracts. You have risk with any technology, malfunctioning, design error, misinterpretation of the model, incorrect information. All of that needs to be accounted for in the traditional contract. And it makes it even better when you allocate the risk to each party and define which party is reliable for what. That will keep the doctrine intact and make it very clear. Interoperable software. Interoperability is basically where two or more systems can talk to each other and then give each other information and still work together. With so many software applications coming about, you need to make sure both parties, whatever software they use, is interoperable. This can be in your traditional contract and just basically either allocate saying you have to use this software, or make sure whatever software is being used works together. And then accessibility is kind of a long-term issue. BIM is becoming more online, so you never know when it can't be accessible by the third-party software provider. You should make sure in your traditional contract that it's accessible either offline or for a certain amount of years, because let's say there's an investigation years later you want that model for adverse litigation purposes to protect yourself. So accessibility can be an issue. And then ownership, this is more of on the lines of, you have this ongoing model where everyone's putting information into this model. Who owns it? This is a normal provision in any contract, and it should probably clarify more so, be more detailed in a traditional contract with this more collaborative process, but definitely in a traditional contract. Machine learning overview. Basically, I think a lot of us know what machine learning is. It's artificial intelligence that can take data and learn from it. It finds patterns and applies its analytics to it, and then gives predictions. The biggest use of machine learning is to go through whatever information you have in front of you. It could either be documents, emails, forms, Excel sheets, and it'll look through words, numbers, images, symbols. It's pretty crazy what it can do nowadays. And then it'll make predictions, and also called predictive analysis or analytics. The real world uses of machine learning: identify the most profitable project. You can look at all your prior projects, what kind of went in, what made it profitable, what didn't, and then it'll give you a prediction of the projects in front of you, what's the most profitable. It could also find on your work site the materials of when to buy them, because if you look in the past, there's price fluctuations, there's availability at certain parts of the year, and many other factors that it can look through and then make a prediction of when is the best time to buy this material, when is it the cheapest. Using on-site data, you can use that to do project schedule updates. So learning from prior projects again, and worksite data, it can determine what causes delays, what causes other time constraints, and then if it sees that, it can update a schedule, or at least alert the authorized user of the situation, and suggest that a project schedule should be updated. One that I found that was interesting was employee attrition. Looking at a worksite, machine learning can analyze what kind of degrades an employee over time, and it helps with talent retention. Is that in certain situations, it might point out that employee attrition is more probable in certain situations. And it's definitely interesting for talent retention purposes. Legal issues, again, allocation of risk. I think you can see that this is a problem with all technology. Malfunctions do happen, and machine learning, if, let's say, what happens if it gives you a non-profitable project, or it doesn't find those errors on the work site that should have in the pattern, and someone gets hurt or something like that. That should be accounted for in your traditional contract. However, collective liability is becoming more popular now with artificial intelligence, and it's called a collective liability regime. And what happens here is artificial intelligence manufacturers will pay a levy into this pool of money. And if a customer is hurt, or if a customer is damaged in some way by artificial intelligence, they get money from this pool. And they don't have to prove that a certain manufacturer of artificial intelligence was at fault. They just have to prove that artificial intelligence was the reason that they were harmed. And I think that's a very interesting way of doing it. You would still have your allocation of risk in your traditional contract, but this levy kind of allows you to get money without having to go to court with a specific manufacturer. And then lastly, insurance. That's kind of a normal thing that most companies have, but outside of allocation of risk and collective liability regimes, insurance is your best bet to cover these damages, either through a business interruption coverage or commercial general liability insurance. That's your best bet. And I think now we're moving on to drones, which is Chris's turn.
If you want to present us, sorry, if you want to.
Yep, sorry.
Share
Yep.
it here, I'll take over.
Yep.
All right. All right. I'm going to be talking about drones today for the remainder of this breakout session. And well, I think it's important to note here both about drones, and I think I can say the same about the topics that Zen has covered. Is, you know, normally when we're given presentations about construction legal issues, you know, whether it's contracts or unforeseen conditions or mechanics liens or whatever, we've got a rich body of reference that we're pulling from. You know, these things aren't novel, they're not emerging, they're not, you know, state of art the way these things are. So, you know, the drone technology is updated, you know, regularly. Daily might be overselling it, but next year's drones are going to be better than this year's drones. That's just the way technology works. And the law is trying to keep up, and it's having a hard time doing it. So, and as an added bonus, as the law tends to do, it's made things very technical. The Federal Aviation Administration has gotten involved, very involved, as we'll talk about here, in the regulation of drones, and it's complicated. And in 20 minutes, we're not going to get down into the weeds on most of these nuanced regulations and legal considerations when it comes to drones. What I'm hoping to communicate to you here today is just kind of some of the, you know, don't know what you don't know type of things. You know, if you're going to be using a drone in a commercial construction setting, what kind of things do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to investigate further? So, with that being said, what are contractors using drones for? Pre-construction site survey, aerial surveying and mapping. And as we'll see in the next slide here, if you put a laser beam on a drone, you can start doing three-dimensional things with it. You can start doing calculations for measuring excavation depths and material stockpiles, whether you're going to need to cut or fill a site with your drones. Monitoring document and job site progress. You know, if you're regularly, you know, once a week, you take a lap with the drone and you preserve that data, you have a very visual, real-time means of tracking progress on the project that you can refer to later on if need be. You can monitor your safety and your security. You can inspect work that would be otherwise dangerous for human beings to inspect. If you've got a, you know, 20-story building and you need to look at the curtain wall on the 20th floor, fly a drone up there rather than trying to get a pair of human eyes nearby. You can document force majeure events, weather events, accidents, and again, they're particularly useful for tall projects or for long projects like pipelines or high tension wires or things like that. Other uses, again, the technology has existed for at least a decade or so, where, you know, you can go out, you can set a sophisticated laser beam device on a tripod, and you can take a real-time measurement of basically the entire facade of a building. I've only been involved in one of those cases, but it was a matter where a curtain wall contractor came in. It was like an Aluka bond product, and they made a claim because they believed that their work took a bunch of time and resources longer than it should have, because they alleged that the building was out of square, dimensions were off, windows weren't built to spec, and they had to field engineer their manufactured panels, their shop built panels, in order to fit this project. And in order to investigate whether or not that claim was legitimate, the contractor hired one of these laser beam surveying companies that went out and shot the entire site and was able to measure every angle, every dimension, every window, check every square very quickly. Now imagine that technology mounted on a drone rather than on a tripod on the ground. That's happening, and that's an image of the type of data that you will get back, the type of image you can get back, and you can appreciate the amount of output, the amount of statistics that you can get very, very quickly. They can be mounted with thermal, moisture, and gas sensors. So if you need to investigate whether there is a dangerous vapor leak or something like that, now you can send a drone in rather than a person in a hazmat suit or something like that. Of course, the center information integrates with CAD, BIM, other design interfaces. This drone information, again, can be very happy in dispute resolution and in your marketing materials. Everybody likes a good flyover or a good aerial shot of a finished project. But with this new technology comes both new law and the application of old law in a new context. And we're going to talk about both. First, we'll start with the new law. There is a CFR chapter. That's the Code of Federal Regulations, the same federal laws that give us, OSHA requirements and other thing. It has its own chapter on drones now, or as the law likes to call them, the unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. For UAVs weighing less than 55 pounds. That's what this chapter applies to it. Your average commercial construction used drone is going to be less than 55 pounds. So first of all, your drone's got to be registered with the FAA. They need to know what's out there. Much like your vehicle or your gun needs to be registered, so does your drone. And also, much like your car, your drone has to be operated by somebody who is licensed to operate it. We call them RIPCs or RPICs, excuse me, or remote pilots in command. And the law requires the drone to either be operated directly by an RPIC or under an RPIC's direct supervision. And direct supervision literally means that if the RPIC needs to step in and take the wheel, they need to be there to do that. So training is fine, but you need to be nearby, or you have an RPIC nearby if the drone is being used. Generally, a drone can't be controlled from a moving vehicle. There are exceptions for rural types of situations, but if you're in a metropolitan area, you're operating a drone with your feet on the ground. Your speeds cannot exceed 100 miles an hour. Your elevation can't exceed 400 feet if you're within 400 feet, unless you're within 400 feet of a structure. So, or rules, generally they can only fly during the day. And you must maintain a line of sight. You have to be able to see your drone. You can't send it around the building or a mile away or whatever. You can't operate them unless there's at least 3 miles of visibility. You obviously have to yield right of way to aircraft. You might have to coordinate with air traffic control if there's a risk that you might get into a flight path. These next ones are the most relevant, I think, to commercial construction use. Without a waiver, you can't fly a drone over people unless they are the people operating the drone. So what that means is without a waiver, in most cases, you're not going to be able to fly a drone over your job site, over your project workers, over your visitors. Now there is the waiver option. You can get a waiver, and as with most government types of things, it's you pay a fee, you file an application, and you wait for approval, and that approval might take a while. And if your project schedule or your contract demands that you have a drone out there tomorrow flying over the boys and girls that are building your building, and you don't have your waiver yet, you're probably not going to get it by tomorrow, and that's going to be an issue for you. So think ahead. And investigate whether local laws apply. Most of this is federal regulation driven, but if Hamilton County or the city of Cincinnati or the state of Ohio decide that they want to start regulating these things too, it's their prerogative to some extent to do so. So take a look at the local ordinances and see if there are additional local rules that you need to follow. Now some of those are the new laws. Those are the laws that didn't exist before because you didn't need drone law when there were no drones. Now that there's drones, they're being regulated. But we also have the old laws that can now be applied in a new context, in this context of drones. We're going to talk about a few of them. First is privacy. These drones can go where people can't go, right? Which gives a new and creative way to invade the privacy of others. And that can be anything from personal harassment to type of situation to a corporate espionage type of situation. If you're flying your drone over your competition's new facility to see what it is they're doing, that could be an invasion of privacy. And under the eyes of the law, first of all, it has to be intentional. You have to know you're intentionally. You have to intend to be invading someone's privacy. It can't be a passive thing where you accidentally capture some footage. So I meant to do it. I didn't have permission to do it. And I wanted to capture these images that are private. There is a legitimate argument that this was private information. It's something that wouldn't have been available to the public if you hadn't gone snooping, and that's offensive to a reasonable person. So if I fly my drone over my competition's new facility and I'm taking pictures to see what types of equipment they're installing,
Hey, Jen, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Do you have any
Such
questions?
amazing presentation so far.
Good. Do you have any questions or need anything before we start your session?
No, I don't think so. I think I should be good.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and see if I can share my. Should I be ready with my screen share and everything right now?
Yeah, you can if you want to. If you want to put it up. So
Okay.
I didn't think about this, and I will for next time, but I didn't put any buffer time in between these two sessions and yours. So some of them might, so one group might end earlier than the other. Hopefully they don't run over too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. And would I be expecting a cue from you as to when I should start? So
Yeah.
you would be able to see people joining in?
Yeah. So just
Okay.
wait for me. I will introduce you.
Okay.
And then you can go into the presentation.
Awesome.
So hopefully we'll be close to 11:15. So, all right. I was trying to think if I had any questions or anything, but I don't think I do. So I have the one poll ready to go. So I'll put that up once you get to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should be good.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump back into the session that I was in.
Sure.
And then I will be back out here hopefully in like 10 minutes or less.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
project that belongs to us. If that's what your contract says, then that's how it's going to be treated by the court. And if you don't want them using it for something else, you should have contracted differently. Maybe the owner wants to own it. Maybe the architect wants to own it. Maybe the contractor wants to own it. Maybe everybody wants their own kind of license to use it. The owner wants to use it for marketing. The contractor wants to use it for building the building. The architect wants to, the architect wants to use it for, future work, whatever. Whether or not you can do that in the future depends on your contract and your intellectual property rights. Cybersecurity, two key concerns. What if somebody hacks your drone, takes over it? That's a problem. Second, what if somebody hacks your information and steals it all? And you were building a government facility, and now your drone's been hacked, and who knows who's got that information. Collective bargaining. There's some hubbub in some jurisdictions where the unions have very strong opinions on how drones should impact their workforce. And if you've got a collective bargaining agreement on the one hand that's inconsistent with your contractual obligation to use a drone on a project on the other hand, you're gonna have to square that, and that could be tricky. So best practices. What do I do here? I've just been hit with all this information all at once. First of all, before you get involved in a drone, commercial drone use, review the applicable laws and regulations. Take a look around and see what there is to see. There's a lot of great stuff just on Google. Google's not the best place to end, but it's a good place to begin with regard to figuring out what the rules are. Review all your relevant contracts. Develop a drone pilot vetting criteria. If you're going to have somebody within your organization operating the drone that becomes the RPIC, set up a protocol to validate that that person is and remains well qualified to do that. Create updates, notices, release forms, manuals, job site signage. Basically, you don't want anybody to be surprised or taken aback by the fact that these drones are going to be out. So notice, document, release forms. It's everywhere. Everybody knows we're going to be using these drones. And if they've got an objection to it, they can speak now or forever hold their peace type of situations. Develop a drone accident reporting procedure. That's a big thing that I haven't mentioned yet. What if a drone crashes into a building, into a person, into an airplane? Okay, that's a very real concern. So develop an accident protocol so that if the inevitable eventually will happen, and if it does on your project, you have a plan and can act quickly and hopefully mitigate the consequences. Define procedures for capturing and preserving drone captured footage. So where does this information go? Where is it stored? How can it be accessed, and who can access it? And develop contract writer templates, operating procedures, your company policy, update everything. Make sure your documentation is covered. The earlier bullet about documentation was more from a job site / employee and worker notice type of situation. This is kind of the cousin of that from your corporate agreement type of situation. Make sure your contracts, your costing, the plans and specs, anything that needs to address how drones are going to be dealt with on a project, try to button it all up, dot the I's and cross the T's. And in conclusion, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Zenas. Thank you all for your time today.
Yeah. So just basically in conclusion, at least for what I was talking about for BIM and smart contracts, blockchain, etc. These technologies are exciting. They can be very useful. They can be efficient, save time, money, etc. Just like smart contracts and BIM, the real-time data, all of that can be very useful. But the legal issues or the legal requirements for drone usage, that it's very important, and it's something you just got to thoroughly discuss and think about before using these technologies. And especially for smart contracts, in my sense, is that it can be very useful, but it can't be used for everything. Traditional contracts are still going to be there. I don't think traditional contracts are going anywhere. They're still going to be useful. They have a place. But as Chris was saying, with the best practices, you need to review the legal requirements of all these technologies. And make sure you got a full sense before you use them. And I think that's it. Jen?
She's probably coordinating the transition breakout
Gotcha.
rooms. But again, thanks to everybody, and if anybody has any questions, give us a call.
Yep, thank you.
All right. I'm here, sorry.
Oh, no problem.
I didn't see any questions in the chat box. So if anybody has any, feel free to drop those in there. If not, I can share their contact information with you and you can connect with them offline. But if no one has anything, we will finish out the event back in the main room with our last breakout session. So if you'd like to hit the blue leave room button and head over there, we will start that. But thanks, Chris and Zenas, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.